Hello. Hello again. People who saw me earlier on, I apologize. You have to see me twice on stage. I know that's difficult. We do have alcoholic beverages later on so that you can, work your way through the trauma then. But I've got a question. I started my last presentation with a question. I'm going to start with a question here. How many standards do you think we have? Does anybody guess?
Ooh.
15, 16? Was it 50 or 60? I can't quite hear, but 15, 16, actually quite correct, depending on whether you're including PCI DSS or MPOC, is very, very correct. How many documents do you think we have available for download on our website? Hundreds? Hundreds is good. It's broad, but it's correct. I think that's mainly correct. You may have an adult beverage later on. Very well done. So for those of you who thought to yourselves or answered in your head 322, well done for cheating, because you can pull it up on the app, so very well done. So we have, it says 324, we've moved a couple, so 322 at the moment. So we've got a lot of documents there. Who's read them all? Anybody, have you read them all?
Nope.
I have not read them all myself either. There's a lot of documents, there's a lot of standards, there's a lot of content that we have.
We should count the pages the next time we do this.
We should count the pages, and then I think we just need a slide with lots of zeros on it to get across there. So what we're going to be talking about today is what those documents are, how they relate to each other, and how you know which standards might apply to you, which programs might apply to you, how they interact, and how they work. Because there's a lot that we have. So why don't you walk through some of the things that we have here?
Well, we obviously the last presentation was certainly about one of those standards, but in talking about our standards in general, we have standards that cover all kinds of different payment solutions. They range from standards outlining security requirements for how account data is actually loaded onto the physical card. We have standards on how devices or systems that secure this data, or how they're expected to secure this data as they're performing transactions. Oh yeah, thank you, I forgot about that. We have standards around securing payment data on web pages. We have standards on how to secure software on these for these systems and others, as well as how those software applications are expected to be developed. If you're paying on the web, you may be required to securely authenticate yourself using 3D Secure. We have multiple standards for that. And of course, we have standards for how all systems which store, process, or transmit cardholder data are to be secured. So as Andrew mentioned, in total we have 16 different standards, 11 of those that can result in an actual product listing on our website. And of course, we did not get here overnight. It has taken us a long time to get to this number of standards. We started out with one or two, which I believe you're going to talk about.
I am indeed. Now, you would have heard if you were here for my previous presentation, Jeremy was talking about the fact that he first met me in 2004. 2004 was when we had the POI standard, and that was before PCI as PCI SSC existed. There was a PCI POI or PCI PED standard that existed back then, and we had the PCI DSS standard as well, obviously, that exists to manage and allow for the security of cardholder data in environments that store, process, and or transmit it. But a long time has passed. A lot of things have changed in how payments are made. A lot of things have changed in security. A lot of things have changed in technology since then. So those version 1 standards, well, things have changed, and we have updated our documents to reflect that. When you see these numbers here, the numbers are essentially major versions when they've come out. Little triangles are minor versions. And so you can see as things have changed, we've released these new documents, and obviously PCI DSS version 4, large document, a lot of changes in there. It's taken quite a while to get there, released this year, fantastic document. PCI PED standard has been incremented a little bit more regularly with more incremental changes essentially through those. But we mentioned there's more than that. And so we've got these different standards that exist that we've been working on over time, that we've been developing. And as we do that, we've been implementing new versions of those as well and changes to those. And you can see that hopefully there's a whole lot of documents, not just the documents, those 322 documents that exist for download on our website. There's all these historical documents as well, these different versions that have existed that we've developed and we've worked on, and new standards like MPOC that are coming out and we're working on over time as well. And we're continually looking at how can we improve these, how can we make them better. I will give this to you.
Oh, I believe you still get to go.
I'm still here?
Yeah.
Okay.
You have a couple of more slides to go.
Okay, so how do these interact? So maybe you're a vendor. Maybe you make things. Maybe you're a technology producer. We have standards for that. We have people who make technology, make devices, make software, make things, whether they be soft things or hard things and so forth, for accepting payments, for managing keys. We've had a talk about HSM earlier on. We have standards around that. We have standards for how you might provide solutions in a card not present environment as well. But maybe you're a consumer of those standards, not a consumer from the point of view of consuming, going shopping and so forth, but taking those standards and doing things with them, those products, those services, the software, the hardware. You've got encryption and PIN support services. You've got merchant services for acquiring and payment processing. You've got payment instruments and so forth for personalizing cards, producing those cards, distributing those cards and so forth. And of course, ultimately, you've got the merchants as well who rely on all of these technology vendors, all of these service providers to actually do payments. Do you want to do it now? I'll do it now. So ultimately, we have then these different standards that exist here, and we talked about those 15, 16 different standards that exist across the ecosystem. And where you see them spread across the horizontals, this is where something doesn't necessarily always apply, but might apply. You might have standards that apply to a technology vendor, yes, but there might be an aspect of the operational to that as well that might apply. Or you might be producing devices and you might be relied upon to load keys into them and use them and so forth.
So let's look at some examples. So maybe you're developing a card-present payment acceptance solution. Well, that's great. We have standards for that. If you're developing a traditional hardware payment terminal, you'll want to look at our PCI PTS POI standards. Our standard, I should say. If you're developing a payment solution to run on a mobile device, for example, well, we have 2 now with 3 pending. That would be SPOC, CPOC, and MPOC once it's available. Oh, sorry, you got it? Oh yeah, animations, how about that? But it gets a little bit more complex than just this. So if your solution accepts pens, you're going to want to understand the PCI PIN requirements. Now, if you're not directly loading keys into the device, maybe you don't necessarily need to meet the PCI PIN requirements, but your products, if they are handling keys, are going to need to align with the key management requirements within PCI PIN, so it's worth being familiar with that. You also may want to provide a solution that provides benefits like reduced PCI DSS validations efforts for merchants for PTS devices. That means you'll want to be familiar with the PCI point-to-point encryption standard. And then if you're developing software for these systems, you're going to want to be familiar with the software security framework. For example, if you're creating software for an MPOC solution, MPOC has a direct reference to PCI secure software lifecycle requirements. So let's look at another example. So what if you're creating a card not present acceptance solution? Well, PCI software security framework is still something you're going to be aware of. We have 2 standards I talked about earlier today, the Secure Software Lifecycle Standard and the Secure Software Standard. We have a new module that we're adding to the Secure Software Standard, expected to be published before the end of this year. That's for web software, and that outlines requirements for secure web-based payment solutions. If you're doing something specific with 3D Secure, then you're going to want to be familiar with the fact that we have two different 3D secure standards. We have one for the core 3DS infrastructure that we refer to as the PCI 3DS core standard. But if you're developing an SDK to work with those solutions, then the PCI 3DS SDK solution is something you're going to want to be familiar with. And then let's say you're a merchant. Now, the term merchant means a lot of different things. Some merchants write their own software. They run their own payment processing switches. But let's say you're a merchant that's only accepting transactions through other systems. You don't run a switch. You don't develop or sell payment products. In this case, you're going to obviously want to be focused on PCI DSS. And in fact, PCI DSS has extremely broad applicability really across all of these different types of solutions, particularly if you store, process, or transmit cardholder data. That is something that you're absolutely going to be familiar with. And I expect that you're all in this business, and because Fashion Week was last week, if you're here for Fashion Week, then you're in the wrong place, unfortunately. So with that, I dressed for it, but I don't know.
I think you're outdoing me. I still think you can carry it off. But it's not just the standard documents themselves. So we have other documents that exist, and these documents provide guidance, but they can also provide information that is supplementary to the standards themselves. So we have these technical FAQ documents. You might be familiar with the FAQs that we have with PCI DSS, and you can search for those on the website. Those FAQs help clarify items that exist within PCI DSS. The technical FAQs that we have exist in documents that are in our resource library, and those technical FAQs provide more than just clarity. They provide more detail around specifics when it comes to our standards, and they allow us to be a little bit more agile when it comes to adapting to changes in threat landscapes, to adapting to changes in technology. And the slide I showed you before, where we had all of those standards, kind of down the page, and we had all of those different versions. There was squares, there was triangles. It was very pretty. All of those things we still need, even though we're going through and we're updating those standards as often as we can't update them quickly enough to maintain currency with what is changing in payments, with what is changing with the industry, with what is changing with the way you need to work with your customers and the way the world needs to ensure that card payments are being secured. And so to keep that currency, to maintain our ability to stay on top of those changes, we have our technical FAQ documents as well that relate to the various standards that they point to. And you can see here we have them for PTS and the mobile standards and P2P and so forth. So if you're working within a scope that requires you to know something about Spock, or requires you to know something about PIN, or requires you to know something about P2PE, it's important that you're not just looking at the standard, you're looking at the technical FAQs as well. So you need to make sure that you're keeping on top of all of that information. So what does all this mean? I think ultimately the one thing I would like everybody in this room to walk away with is the knowledge and the certainty that it is not just PCI. Quite often when I talk to people, they will say things, I need to be compliant with PCI, or I'm working with PCI, or I want to talk to you about PCI. And my immediate answer, and I tell you what, after I get off stage, you can come up and ask me this, and this will be my answer, PCI what? We have more than just PCI DSS. PCI DSS is great. It's fantastic. It's a brilliant standard. Version 4, I think, is a wonderful evolution, and in some cases, revolution of that standard in the way it approaches the assessment methodologies and so forth. But when you talk to different people, PCI means different things. If you're talking to a device vendor and you say PCI, they're probably going to think, oh, we're talking about PTS. If you talk to a mobile application vendor and you say PCI, they're probably going to be thinking SPOC or CPOC or MPOC. If you talk to a payment processor who's handling PINs and you say PCI, they might think PCI PIN. So be specific when you think about these things and you talk about these things, and also understand when somebody's talking to you about PCI, try and clarify exactly what. And if there is additional scope that you need to consider in terms of the standards that might apply to your situations. Each standard covers different areas, different use cases, and different contexts, but they do link together and they do work together, and they are generally quite orthogonal in the way that they combine. We have things like operational and technical aspects. And you can think of, for example, with PCI PTS, that's the technical aspect of the device, so the physicality of the tamper responsiveness of the hardware, of the software, of the firmware of that system, of that device. And then you have the PCI PIN standard, which is the operational aspects of how you manage key management and get the keys into that device, remote key loading, translation of pins when you're actually using it. So you've got the technical aspect and the operational aspect, and they work together, but they are different. So our standards are under constant evolution and update, and we retire standards. We're retiring PCI DSS this year.
In just a few days.
Yep, and we have a new standard coming out later on this year. I keep on telling everybody that it's coming out this year, so that hopefully I can make sure if I keep on saying it's going to happen, it will happen. But MPOC will be coming out later this year.
So that means we still have 16 even after we retire.
Exactly, exactly. Still 16.
I love it.
Still 16. And so what you do influences what standards you might be interested in. So I think you've worked for a while with the council. The work we do developing our standards, working on our standards, updating our standards, that takes a lot of time, I would imagine. It
takes a tremendous amount of time. I mean, when we started and we only had a handful of standards, everyone remembers the pinwheel of death, the 3-year cycle graphic that we used to have. We don't follow that anymore. We're updating standards really constantly. Just with the software standards, we've had, in 3 years, we've had 3 releases. So it takes quite a bit of work, particularly across the breadth of all the standards and programs that we have.
And so how do we get the input on those standards when we're updating them?
RFCs and interactions like this at community meetings. I mean, just yesterday I had some fantastic conversations about some ideas that we might be able to leverage within the software security framework.
And I think that's really important. We value your input. Hopefully you would have seen what I was talking about earlier on about MPOC, and I showed all of those changes. Honestly, I can't talk about it enough. The input that you provided is valuable. And even if it doesn't relate to a specific change we make, it can then be considered for future uses. We might add guidance as to why we're not making that change, because obviously it's input that's considered and is important. And do come up to us during the show. Ask us questions. Ask us about new standards. Ask us about things. Because ultimately we're here to produce these standards to ensure that payments can continue to be a safe, secure, global way that enables everybody to conduct global business. And I'd recommend be a PO, provide the input on the RFCs, consider some of the different PO options that are available to you now that might provide you with access to Board of Advisors, might provide you with access to different ways to provide input and provide the ability to vote on some of our standards as well, because these are the sorts of things, once again, incredibly valuable to us, great for producing better standards and so forth. So with that, I think that's where we end, and goodbye and good luck.